Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how even Reform UK voters do not support the far-right terror attacks and how those taking part in the violence may be getting a very nasty surprise, even if it's in the next few years. Because I've been getting quite a lot of messages. I get a lot of emails. I don't have time to read them all, I'm afraid, but I get a lot of emails. I've had some from people who have been affected, who are part of groups who have been targeted by these people. And you know, it's difficult to know, I think, where public opinion is, because the media aren't really explaining it a lot, but where public opinion is very much against these rioters. They're not on their side. You know, these groups claim to be acting on behalf of the silent majority. It's how all extremists justify their actions, of course. They always go, the silent majority. Oh yeah, everyone's on our side. You can't hear them. They just don't want to say. They say wherever they are on the political spectrum, whichever end, it's never true. And it's provably not the case here. You know, we've seen evidence of communities coming out after spates of violence to help clear up the mess, make sure people who've been affected get the help they do, condemn the behaviour to journalists. But we can do better than that. YouGov published some polling yesterday. It was very interesting. But the way people were reacting to it, I wasn't quite drawing the right conclusions. It centres on the punishments that are coming the rioters' way and those facilitating the riots. Just like in 2011, those convicted are going to be receiving harsher sentences than normal. I suspect it's why so many of those convicted so far have been pleading guilty. The video and photographic evidence will be clear. Their defence counsels presumably are advising them that the sentence is only going to get worse if you force a full trial. Several of those convicted have already broken down crying in court. All of the men, as far as I can tell. There have been some women convicted. I think all the stories of people actually crying in court, the men, thought they were hard, didn't they? Thought they were big and hard. And this is the reason why the sentences are so harsh. It's not to make people cry, but it's because the real nutters behind these attacks, I mean, they're not going to be swayed by tough prison sentences. They're too far down the rabbit hole. But there are only a few of them. You know, the actual Nazis, the ones who are really at the centre of this, there are only a few of them. If they were the only ones turning up, the police would be able to manage them. It's the rest. It's the bulk of the mob who are very badly misguided, but they've got ordinary lives, they're doing ordinary jobs, nice enough family life probably. All of that disappears down the toilet once they're thrown into prison. The harsh sentences are designed to persuade those people it's not worth it. The people have been breaking down in tears in court, they've suddenly realised it wasn't worth it. But in order to get that message through, that message has to get out there that there is no getting off, because people may imagine, oh, well, I'm only really just part of the crowd. You know, I might get a tap on the wrist or something. I might get a fine. They don't think they're going to prison. The message has to get out there. This isn't a bluff. And it's not a bluff. It happened in 2011. It's not just that the government are saying they're going to do this. They've already done it. It's going to happen again. But the YouGov poll asked people whether the sentences should be harsher than normal, if the sentences should be the same as they would normally be for the same sort of crime, or if the sentences should be more lenient. Now, in general, across the population, 49% think the sentences should be harsher, 39% think they should be about the same. Only 4% think the sentences should be more lenient, then you got another 7% who aren't sure one way or the other. So 4% of the population having any sympathy for the rioters, that is not exactly a strong endorsement for the notion of representing ordinary people or the silent majority. But when you break it down by how they voted at the election, it gets interesting. Because people immediately latched onto the fact that a majority of people who voted Labour, Lib Dem or Conservative agree with the harsher sentences. Only 3 or 4% think they should be more lenient. But 15% of Reform voters thought the sentences should be more lenient, suggesting 15% of Reform UK voters go, oh no, they've got a genuine grievance. And people immediately said, well, of course, Reform UK voters have got sympathy for the rioters. But that's not what the results show. They show that sympathy is above average amongst Reform voters, but it's still very, very small, 15%. And that's of Reform UK voters. 27% of Reform UK voters think the sentences should be harsher. They're outraged at the rioters. Absolutely outraged. They want the book thrown at them. That's nearly twice as many Reform voters want the book thrown at them as want them to be dealt with leniently. And, so yes, 27%, that's half the rate of those who voted for the other parties thinking that. It's still way more than think should be lenient. And just over half of Reform voters think the sentence should be the same. So they still think they should be going to prison if prison is appropriate. And it's perfectly reasonable to think, for anyone to think the sentences should be the same. It's natural to think everyone should be treated fairly and evenly. Because particularly if you don't understand the strategy behind it, the sentence has been harsher, because I don't think the media have been trying to explain that. And even if you do realise why the sentence has been harsher strategically, you can still hold a reasonable view that actually, no, the sentences should still be consistent. The point is 78% of Reform UK voters think the rioters should not be shown any leniency. Then you've got another 7% who aren't sure. So however you slice it, the vast majority of Reform UK voters, the people who are much more likely to sympathise with the stated cause of these thugs, do not support the action. They do not accept that the attacks are an appropriate way to express those concerns. Reform UK voters themselves do not think that the rioters have got any justification for these actions, putting them at odds with Nigel Farage's dog whistling. And those taking part in the riots and agitating online, they're going to be in for a bad time of it. Because there's been senior lawyers, barristers, prosecutors, former prosecutors as well, former police officers. They've been all over the media and social media explaining how the investigations are going to go on for as long as it takes, for years. And those caught will be going to prison for a long time. And these aren't people attached to the government or the police. They're not pushing this message because it's part of their job to do so. They're saying what they believe. They're independent. They're saying what, based on their own experiences of like 2011, for example. The secret barrister noted that the justice system, yes, is more poorly resourced now than it was in 2011 after over a decade of savage Tory cuts. So the process may take longer this time. But they also said there is no statute of limitations on crimes like this. So there is no period at which if someone's looking over their shoulder, they've been at one of these riots, they probably know they've been filmed, but they haven't had their collar felt yet. There is no period of time after which they can go, phew, I've got away with it now. No. If it takes 10 years for the police to identify some of these knuckle draggers, they'll be getting a knock on the door in 10 years' time. This will never stop. Obviously, the resourcing that's been put into identifying and convicting people right now, okay, will wane a bit, but they will always be on record. There's a heavy deterrent factor at work here. And it's not just to stop the current attacks sooner rather than later. That's the most urgent priority. It's for the future as well. Because these rioters obviously don't know what happened in 2011 or they've forgotten. Because otherwise, I don't think as many would be joining in this time. It's possible that some are aware. These are the ones wearing face masks, thinking that'll save them. It's quite funny. Someone put a post online yesterday, a fellow in a balaclava, obviously trying to hide his identity, but he had a sleeveless shirt, and on his shoulder was a very distinctive tattoo. And it's like, yeah, I think we might still be able to identify you, mate. But so many are active online with their own accounts. So if the police want to go after them, they've been using their own accounts, stirring or promoting the violence. They'll have their collars felt. I've not heard of any people arrested for inciting the violence online yet, but that's presumably because there's a very long list to get through. And I think the ones on the streets are the top priority right now. And those on the streets, I mean, they've been allowing themselves to be filmed carrying out their criminal acts. Think about where we are. 2024, there's a lot more people with phones just randomly filming things than there would have been in 2011. So there'll be more photographic and video evidence this time for the police to work through. Much more. Some may think because they're just in the mob, they'll just say, oh, I'm just in the crowd, I'm just here to have a look, right? I'm not throwing anything, I'm not kicking any windows in, I'm just here. And they think they'll be fine. No, you're still part of the riot. You're still adding to that book. You're still making it difficult for the police to deal with those who are throwing, because they don't know you're not going to throw something. They don't know you're not going to kick a window in. They have to treat you, every part of the mob is treated as someone who potentially will carry out a violent act. So simply being part of the mob can mean 10 years in prison. Just being there, 10 years in prison. Chanting a racist slogan, that can get you 7 years in prison. What the government want to do here is parade some of the sentences that come through, so that the sort of people who think, oh, if I do this, yeah, it's a bit naughty, but I'll just get a fine or something, so that The government want them to see that actually some of the people doing this that you think's quite innocuous have actually now found themselves in prison for 5 years. You know, so they're not just sending a message for these riots, because the riots will be over by the time sentencing is done. The people who've been convicted so far, I've heard they're on remand, which means they're locked up. They're not going anywhere. But sentencing will be like next month. So there's going to be a delay before the sentences start to come through. So it's not just about this riot, it's future ones for people who might be tempted to take part in ones in later years. Obviously, the message didn't get through strongly enough after 2011. The government want to make sure that it does this time. And the fact that it will take a very long time to go through all the evidence, that it could take years, that helps in a way, because it means arrests will still be happening in a few months' time, so it can be mentioned in the news again. In a few years' time, the government can make a big deal. In a couple of years' time, they can remind people and they can say, you know, this is how many people are in prison now for this, and throw out a few ones. We're still doing it. We haven't forgotten. There's no statute of limitations. We're still after you. If you were taking part in these and you've not been caught yet, you're going to be caught. They can keep pushing this message. They could even do an annual report if they wanted to really get that message out there, that if you take part in a riot, and you're almost certainly going to be filmed, because everyone's filming everything these days, no matter how innocuous you think your role is, you might just think you're just there staring at the blackbirds in the sky. No, you're part of the mob. You'll go to prison for a long time. And if you've got a nice job and a nice home life, you can kiss goodbye to it. And I'd be willing to bet these are the people who've been breaking down in tears in court. They thought they might, at worst, get a fine for disorderly conduct. Instead, they find themselves on remand, awaiting sentencing, having been warned to expect to be away from their families for years. Some of them may want to think about why as well. Why they pissed their lives away so that Tommy Robinson or Nigel Farage can make money spreading their hate. Mind you, if there's any justice, that should end soon enough as well. Maybe Robinson has actually finally gone too far this time, but I have to see it before I believe Farage will face justice. He's much more careful with his language. It's always innuendo with him, isn't it? Rather than explicit statements. Even the two-tier policing attack. He doesn't accuse the police of two-tier policing himself. He just says, oh, there's this widespread perception of it. As if all he's doing is reporting what others think rather than saying what he thinks himself. But as those people do go to prison, I just wonder if any will reflect on the fact those who urge them to go out and destroy our country and their own lives, they're not going to be sharing their prison cell. I even saw a tweet from someone who openly said he supported Tommy Robinson, but he was annoyed. You know, I was annoyed because some of the thugs chanting Tommy Robinson's name kicked his windows in. Why are you kicking my windows in? They're just kicking windows in, mate. Incredible. You can be annoyed at the destruction caused by Robinson and yet still say you support him. So maybe most won't reflect on the fact they chose to put their faith in the wrong people after all. But there we are. Hopefully that brings you up to speed with where, you know, things are going with this. There's a lot more to discuss, of course. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, there's memberships as well. Thanks for listening, and until next time, I'll see you later.